before we start with a ton of questions, would you mind just introducing yourself, who you are and what you do, and kind of your connection to Texas area?
Okay, well, my name is Janas Caruncho. I am the senior pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Sugar Land, and I moved to Texas right after Hurricane Harvey to lead the church. They called me to lead the church here, and so I've been in the Houston area for around 6 years now. And it was definitely quite an indoctrination to move during one of the biggest hurricanes that has hit Houston. Uh, but through that, we've really seen people really pitch in together and help each other through a disaster. There's nothing like knowing an area more than seeing how they handle disasters together. And I really saw some of the best of human nature with neighbors really helping each other out during Hurricane Harvey. Um, but that was quite a start, an introduction to the Houston area.
Yeah, that is very crazy in terms of adjustment, I'm sure. It's more than enough adjustment as it is just moving, but adding the hurricane would be crazy.
Yes.
Yeah. So why don't we start with, can you just tell us a little bit about how you were raised, kind of how you would describe your parents' parenting style?
Sure. I was raised in, I grew up in Manila, Philippines. And my mom was a pharmacist, and my dad was a colonel in the military. And so they were very strict as I was growing up. There's a lot of rules to follow, as you can imagine. But they were also very loving. They invested a lot in my academics. And so my mom would make worksheets for me to try to complete. So I would do a lot of math. They were also very religious. My mom was a very devoted Catholic, and so she would send me to church every day. We would go to church every day and go to mass. And I was young, and I'd fall asleep because it wasn't that interesting for a kid in elementary school. Then we moved to the United States when around when I was 10 or 11, and it was quite an experience to have that experience as an immigrant moving to a new area, a new land, a new country. I think the first time we moved to the United States, I was in awe of how beautiful it was and how large it was. Uh, I think one of the first places I went to touch down was Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. And so definitely left me with quite an impression of the United States. Uh, and yeah, and I guess through learning more about our country here and how my parented me and tried to protect me as an immigrant child, I thought that was quite um, just really selfless of them. They made a lot of sacrifices for my future and for my education, and they worked really hard to provide for me. And so I could see that, and even though they were strict in their parenting, I could see that there was a lot of love and sacrifice that went behind that because it was driven out of a love and care and concern for me as a child. When you're a child, you don't really appreciate those things. It just feels very restrictive and repressive. Uh, but now, as a parent myself, I kind of see what they were getting at and what they were trying to do.
Mm. I was wondering, so you mentioned that you went to church every day because your mom was like very Catholic.
Yeah,
And
she was very devoted.
I have a lot of friends who like similarly their parents would force them or like make them go to church like so many times a week and they really grew like a lot of resentment towards that just because they didn't want to go to church that many times. Is that kind
Yes.
of the experience you felt? And if yes, like how did you get from that to now being a pastor now?
Well, yeah, I think as a child, when you're forced to do something, you're just not happy. Anything, right? Whether it's forced to do sports, even something that's enjoyable. But whenever you're forced to do something, um, there's some reluctance as a child. Uh, I think how I got over some of that was I had my own faith journey. right? It wasn't actually my mom who led me to faith. It was my friends in high school. It was my friends in high school telling me, "Hey, you want to come with us to youth group? You want to come with us to church?" And I was like, "No, I don't want to do that. That's boring." My mom used to force me when I was a child. And so it was through my interactions with my peers that I got to really appreciate um, what was going on at church and what was actually being said. I actually started paying attention rather than when it was being force fed to me by my mother.
For sure. Do you feel like being raised as like Asian American and immigrating, did that have like an effect on how you kind of dealt with the identity of being either Catholic or Christian growing up?
um, what do you mean? What do you mean by that question? I guess I want to clarify before I tackle
Yeah,
it.
I guess just to like what extent, I mean, maybe even just to put it like between like feeling like you were raised um Filipino versus feeling like you were raised Christian or Catholic. Um,
Hmm.
was there one that like felt more prominent in your childhood?
I think when you're a child, you don't. It's not very introspective. You just do and follow what your parents do, and you're just confused, right? In a lot of ways, I was between two different cultures, speaking two different languages, one at home, one at school. Um, as far as the faith language, most of the people around me were not of my same ethnicity. Um, at church. And so I think there's a little displacement that you feel as a young person, but you don't really process that too much when you're young. Uh, I think my identity, um, since when I was young, it was forced upon me. My identity was not uh, Catholic or Christian. That was not a big part of my identity. I think in a lot of ways, since I was made fun of because I had an accent when I first came to school here, and they would make fun of my lunch, things like that. And I think in a lot of ways that made me really recognize, oh, I'm Asian. I'm Filipino. I'm different. I'm other. Even though I can speak English, even though coming from the Philippines, I watched American television shows, and so I could relate to the culture a little bit. I was still other. While people were kind and welcoming to me as an immigrant child in the 80s, with kids tend to just make fun of things that are different, right? And so I could definitely tell I was different. And so, in some ways, because of that, you remember that as part of your identity more than just, "Hey, I'm a child. I'm a human being. I'm your friend." When people try to say, "Oh, you eat different things," or you smell different, or you sound different," it heightens some of those things in the mind of a child.
Mm,
But maybe it's too early for a child to ponder those things, right? But I think kids can be brutal.
that's very true. I agree with that. Kind of going back to how you felt your parents parented you, do you see similarities in your parenting style now?
Uh, yes, I mean, I try to take the things that I really admired and loved about their parenting, as well as tweak it in the same way that like some of the things I didn't like or I didn't appreciate or I wish they did more of. And that's what I try to incorporate to my parenting. Not to criticize my own parents. I think they did the best that they could, depending on how they were parented, um, and their own wishes from what their parents should have done for them. And so I think hopefully I've taken the mantle from them and try to grow in parenting my children well, and hopefully when my kids become parents on their own, they'll take some of the good things that I've done and hopefully forget the bad things that I or the mistakes that I've done. So
Is there anything you could elaborate on in terms of a specific thing that you feel like you've changed while being a parent or something that you've taken from your parents?
Taken and changed. Well, I think since we were immigrants, um, I think my mom was very anxious and um, very protective of me. I was an only child, and I think you put those things together, only child and an immigrant. I think she was very protective of me in the culture, and so there was a lot of restrictions placed upon me. Like I couldn't go to amusement parks, or I couldn't go water skiing. I couldn't do the things that my friends were allowed to do because I had to study at home. And so I felt very restricted in a lot of ways. And I knew that she was being overprotective because she cared about me, but that didn't make it any more pleasant as a child. And so I think one thing that I've done as a parent is I've been, while still caring for them and seeking to protect my children from harm, I've given them more freedom. So they've been able to do more of these things at an earlier age than I had. For example, I think even as a young adult, when I went hand gliding, I had to tell my mom after I went hand gliding to tell her, "Hey, mom, I just went hand gliding." She's like, "What? What did you just say?" "Oh, it's over, mom. You can't you can't tell me not to do it anymore because I just did it." And this was me as an adult, so that's kind of how much influence my mom still had me on me as an adult. So that tells you something. But as for my own kids, I try to give them a little more freedom to explore and not to be fearful of uh, of their safety, to trust in God, and if it's fairly safe, then and I allow them to do it.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for sharing some of your experiences. It's kind of segueing off of that. I was wondering what you think would define as like a tiger parent, basically, and to what extent you agree or disagree with that level of parenting.
Uh, I think wow, that's a good question. I think tiger parenting is driven by fear, right? Because in a lot of ways, as an immigrant, you're coming to a new area. You're different, and so you want your children to succeed. And the only way I think a lot of immigrant parents think their children are going to succeed is do well at school, and so that they can get a good job, and so they can get a foothold within the country and be a contributing member of the country. So I think the motivation under that is good because you want your children to get a foothold and not uh, suffer through the same struggles that you had as an immigrant. At the same time, it's driven by fear, right? Fear that if they don't do well at school, that there's no foothold in this country. And I think as a child growing up in that, I realized that's not necessarily true. I've had classmates who weren't the most academically gifted at school, who didn't perform as well as some of um, their peers at high school, but now are wonderful adults doing wonderful things for the country, and they have good families and and definitely contributing to our society. So it's academics is not just the only road to be able to be a productive member of society. And so I think some of that tiger momming has come from a fear, right? A fear that if they don't do well academically, how will their future be stable in this land that's different than maybe what they grew up in, right? And so I think a lot of that tiger parenting comes from, yeah, this fear of the future for their kids. So out of both love and fear, it's such an interesting phenomenon. I don't think they tiger their parents, their kids, because they dislike their kids, but I think there's a lot of fear involved, and so this is the best way I think they can uh, express their love. I think so. I think to build off of Karis's question, how is my parenting a little different? I'm a little more relaxed about those things, right? So maybe less strict than my parents. My kids will still stay. I have rules and I'm strict, but I was like, oh, if you only lived in daddy or mommy's household, it would be a little different. Uh, so kids always will push the boundary no matter how lenient or strict you are, right? uh, there will always be boundaries to push, but I think both my wife and I are cognizant of this tiger parenting being driven by fear. And so while we want to give our children opportunities to succeed and to have them reach their fullest potential, I think there's a realization for both my wife and I that we want to trust in God that they're going to be okay. As long as they do their best. They don't have to be number one at everything. As long as they do their best, they learn what hard work is. They learn socialization with others, to be kind and to be generous to others, to explore their interests. Because sometimes academics is not their interest. And so there are other interests out there, whether it's art, whether it's music, whether it's sports, whatever it is. Kids have varied interests. And so give them the freedom to explore those interests, because I think if you're exploring the things you're interested in, you're going to perform much better in those things if they're not being force-fed to you.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really insightful comment, that it's fear that's driving it. And almost with the way that you're describing, like what you and your wife are doing by trying to trust God, it's almost like relinquishing control, which I feel like is a big aspect of fear and love and control on this Trinity triangle. But kind of another elaboration on this question, I was wondering, like, if you would say that tiger parenting and Christian values can coexist, or do you see them fundamentally at odds with each other?
Could they coexist, or are they at odds with others? That's another good question. Well, I think there's no monolithic tiger parenting method. I'll put it that way, right? I think it's a relative statement how kids regard tiger parenting. And so one child would have to study 5 hours a day, and another child would have to study 15 minutes a day. And they could consider both those requirements tiger parenting, right? Depending on the child's perspective and what they're used to. Regarding the more philosophical part of your question, I think I would I guess couch it this way. If fear is what's driving you to be this tiger parent, then that is opposed to Christian values of faith, because Christianity tells us to have faith over fear, right? If we idolize success and worldly wealth, well, that's not a Christian value as well, right? So really depends what's motivating the tiger parenting, and what level of tiger parenting, because there's a balance there in the sense that you want to create a structure for your children. You want them to learn discipline. You want them to learn perseverance and hard work. And some people might call that tiger parenting. Well, those things are Christian values, right? Strive for excellence, work hard and for the Lord. And so that caveat comes into play there. So what is motivating this tiger parenting, and what is at the level of it? Because if it's not faith, and if it's driven by fear, if it's driven by a desire for idolatrous wealth or power, then those things are not Christian. But if they're done to discipline your child and to help them learn perseverance and help them to not be crushed by disappointment, but to press on and strive for excellence even in the midst of difficulty, then that is a Christian value. So I think it's how you apply the values that determines whether they're antithetical or not, or whether they're complementary.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think it's really great how you mentioned that the motivation is really important in determining whether something is going to be good for your child or not. But yeah, kind of segueing off of that, what do you think are some values that you really actively try to impart on your children as you're raising them? And where do you think those values came from?
Okay. Well, one of the values that I want to always emphasize with my children is honesty and vulnerability and transparency with their parents. because I seen as a pastor growing up, there are a lot of people who hide sin from their parents, and that they would share with me as their pastor, and that they would never share with their parents. And a lot of their times, their parents are in the dark regarding some of their deepest fears and deepest struggles. And so that their parents, as much as they would want to help them through those deepest fears and struggles that they're experiencing, they don't even get a voice in that, because the children are fearful of how the parents will react, and maybe overreact to those things. And so I think as a parent, when I became a parent, I decided to tell my children, honesty and transparency is important in our family. If you hide things from me, if you lie to me, then I would feel betrayed, and I wouldn't be able to guide you through the struggles that you're going through. So don't be fearful to share with me some of these things, and don't be scared about being punished, right? There will be consequences to your actions, but that won't be the main thing that we're going to be dealing with. Like, if you're struggling, we're going to try to help you. And I think I want to emphasize that to my children. If they're struggling with mental health issues, or they're struggling with stress, or they're struggling with maybe bullying at school, I want to be the first to know. And I also want to share with them that as a parent, I will try not to overreact. It's hard not to overreact when you care about your child, right? But in those moments, that's when the parents have to be disciplined. Okay, I promised I wouldn't overreact. If I want them to continue to be vulnerable and transparent to me, then I have to learn to not overreact. I have to learn not to embarrass them. I have to learn to treat this as something that's precious, and that's a compliment, that they're opening up to me and they're being transparent to me at the risk of themselves, at the risk of being punished or being embarrassed, right? And so how do I become faithful to that risk that they're taking? How do I become trustworthy for their trust? If I'm encouraging to trust me as their parent, then I have to be worthy of that trust, and learn to be trustworthy. And that's hard. It's a delicate balance, obviously. And as they grow up, that gets more and more complex, right? As they deal with the world around them, and try to make sense of the world. But I want to listen first. I think as a parent, you want to listen first to your children before you interject your own voice. I think a lot of times as parents, we have such a strong voice, and we don't realize how strong our voice is in our children's lives. It's a very powerful voice. And sometimes when you have so much power, it's best to hold it back and not lord it over them, and to listen and to hear what's going on in their hearts first. Then once you've heard them, then you can give your 2 cents. Then you can give your guidance and your advice. But I think a lot of times as our parents, our temptation is to interject our voice too quick before we have even heard our children's voice. And so, my kids and I have tried to learn this dance. When they see me trying to interject too quickly, they're like, "Dad, you need to hear me first." And so I was like, okay, you're right. I forgot that part. I just overreacted a little bit there. And so it's learning. I'm not a perfect parent, and my children are not perfect children. But I think if we're striving for what's good together, we can have a healthy relationship, not just when they're children, but hopefully onto their adulthood as well.
I think that's really beautiful. If you kind of had to categorize like this sort of parenting method and style into, I know it's probably not the simplistic, but if you kind of had to proportion out a percentage of how much you think it's your faith versus how much you think it's kind of the Asian part of you that is informing these standards or these philosophies that you are trying to parent your kids by, how would you do that?
Sure. I mean, that is going to be hard to quantify these things. I grew up, like I said, in Asia, and I was parented a certain way. So those things are ingrained in me in a lot of ways, right? That my worldview has been shaped by what I grew up in, and how I was raised. So those are not easily put by the wayside, right? So as growing up in an Asian household, I value academics. As much as I want to be free with my kids for them to pursue interests, I something I value. It's very hard to get rid of that value. If I see a lot of C's and D's, it just, oh, what's going on? Did you not do any work? Did you not study? Right. And so I think as a Asian parent, those things are hard to let go of in a lot of ways. But as a Christian, I, I have to examine myself. It's like, okay, am I idolizing academics? Am I idolizing getting an A? No, I just want them to work hard. And so there's the dilemma within me, right? Is this my Asian upbringing of you got to get 100? And then, or is this my Christian ethic where you have to be faithful and work hard for the Lord? And so there's that dilemma there. And so sometimes I'm like, okay, which one is this? God help me discern. Am I overreacting because I'm Asian? Or am I idolizing this because I'm sinful? And so it's a delicate balance. It's a dance. Nobody, I think, can get this perfect. But we are shaped by our influences, and it's not easy to let go of those things. Now, as a believer, I want God to shape me. I want His Word to shape me, but I know I want the Holy Spirit to shape me. And so, yeah, so I would do my quiet times. I would pray to God. I would ask God for help. But as an imperfect, work in progress human being, it's not going to be perfect. Nobody is perfect. Only Jesus is perfect. That's kind of what we believe as Christians, as believers, right? So, so in a lot of ways, my prayer is, God, help me in my inadequacies as a parent. And you are the ideal parent, so please fill in my gaps, because I want to do my best. And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned as a Christian parent is I have to learn to apologize to my kids when I realize that I'm wrong or that I've sinned against them. As an Asian person, that is so difficult. Apologizing to your kids. The kids should honor their elders. What's going on? How can I do this? But then the Christian ethic would say, no, there has to be humility. There has to be a desire for forgiveness. And when you sin against someone, you should ask for forgiveness. Something I teach my kids, but I also have to apply to myself. And so that's very difficult. And the Bible says, do not lord your authority over others. And that goes to your children too. And while they need to honor me and obey me while they're in my household, how do I not abuse that authority, but use it to serve them and to love them, just how Jesus has loved us, that he had all this power, but he didn't use it for his own gain. He used it to serve and to love others, how he has loved us in that way. And so, how do I pattern myself as a parent? I have all this influence. I have all this power and authority over my children. How do I use it to empower them and to strengthen them and to point them toward God, rather than feed my ego or feed my idols? Where in some ways, some parents, we see their success reflecting on our success. And so we celebrate their success more than our own success. And sometimes we try to live vicariously through our children. And that can be very toxic if it becomes an idol of our heart. And so we have to let go of those idols. And we have to love our children for who they are and how God has made them, while continually helping them grow and mature and reach their fullest potential. I think any parent wants their kid to reach their fullest potential, but not at not at the expense of feeding my idolatry.
Yeah, I think you did a really insightful job of kind of detailing the challenges and the difficulties of having these two somewhat feeling like sometimes they oppose values, trying to walk the balance between the middle of them. I was wondering if you had any insights into something that you feel is positive about being raised an Asian American, even thinking about your for your kids and kind of pairing that with Christianity. Because I know personally, like being raised, my dad, like he'd always be like, it felt very much like, okay, Christianity, like, and then when we do some like ritual or something, he'd be like, pagan, no. Whereas my mom, like, definitely had more of like, okay, no, like keep the culture alive. So I think
Sure.
there's definitely a ton of variety on how people kind of attack this part of them and this issue.
Well, there's a lot of beautiful things about Asian culture, right? Where I think there's the fingerprints of God in every culture. Every culture has the fingerprints of God, and I think when Christ comes into the culture, it doesn't erase or eradicate the culture, but it uplifts it, and in some ways brings it to its best representation of itself, where the toxicity is removed and only the best traits are able to shine from that culture. Um, and so, I've been talking a lot about academics, right? But there's great value in Asian cultures' appreciation for scholarship, because not all cultures appreciate scholarship and good scholarship and dedicated and um, really well articulated scholarship. And I think with Asian cultures, you never have to convince them about the value of education. It's ingrained in our culture, and so I think that's one way, right? And 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 that in Christianity, God has blessed us with minds. God has blessed us with the wisdom to be able to discern and know His will, right? That's why science really developed because of the Christians' desire to understand God's creation. And so a lot of the early scientists were all believers in the foremost field in science. And so in a lot of ways, yes, Asian culture values scholarship. We don't have to uh, we don't have to convince us of that. So that's another one cultural value. I think one cultural value, I think the kids and I, we celebrate all the different um, heritages. My wife is Chinese and I'm Filipino, and we try to celebrate our different feasts and different cultures, and the kids really get to enjoy that because they get to know more of who they are and their ancestry and their heritage. And I think that's valuable for young people to not be ashamed of how God created them, and not be ashamed of where their family's from, and to actually treasure it and to celebrate it and to accept it, that they're not any less than any other culture, that all cultures have been created by God and all cultures should be celebrated, and all cultures can be redeemed by the gospel. Obviously, every culture has faults and uh, in errors within it, right? Some of our traditions are very superstitious, and it's about wealth, right? The idolization of wealth, but we don't have to take it those ways, right? As when we become believers, we just, hey, this is where we're from, and there's negative things associated with some of these things, but there's also positive things. So why just focus on the negative things and ignore it, throw the baby out with the bathwater? I think we can have enough discernment to celebrate the things that are good while leaving behind some of the things that are in the past that are not so good.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It reminds me of like even in the New Testament, when the believers are like trying to figure out the whole like meat question, and they're like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, you're still in the market. It's not like we isolated ourselves, but like you're gonna have discernment about what you're going to eat. And so I think that's kind of like a good principle that you're illustrating there. Kind of jumping to your kids, what has it been like seeing your kids navigate the kind of dual identity of being a pastor's kid as well as being Asian American?
Um, yeah, I think it's a lot easier for them. I'll tackle the Asian American question first, and then we'll deal with the pastor's kid next. I think it's been a lot easier for them to accept their identity as Asian Americans because they're growing up in this new generation. This new generation has a lot more influences and representation because we live in a worldwide entertainment business. Because of YouTube, because of all these social media, they're able to access entertainment from all around the world. And so if they want to listen to entertainment from Korea, if they want to listen to entertainment from the Philippines, they want to listen to entertainment from Hong Kong or Taiwan or China, they can. And there's a lot of stars. K-pop is one of the biggest worldwide music phenomenons going on right now. Some of the biggest stars in the world are Asian. And so they're exposed to these Asian superstars from all around the world that maybe when I was growing up, the only Asian superstar that I was exposed to was Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. And they're amazing actors and they were very influential. But also that was used as a weapon against me when I was younger. They would just make fun of me and they would call me Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan because those are the only international superstars that they've heard of. And so I don't think that happens to my children anymore. They don't get called Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan. I think there's an appreciation of Asian culture worldwide now because Asian culture has been more propagated. And my kids have grown up just loving Asian things. They love Asian food. They're proud of eating Chinese food and sushi and Filipino food. They're proud of those things. I think when I was younger, I was like, these are different. I'm going to be made fun of if they're going to see this. I think the new generation, they're just more proud of their Asian American heritage while appreciating that they're American. There's a lot of more positive representation in their generation. I think I remember taking my kids to see Shang-Chi. There's a Marvel superhero who's Asian. How cool is that? And so they really enjoy that. And I think I remember taking my kids to their first concert, and it was an Asian American singer that I took them to see. And I was like, wow, my first concert was not that. But their first concert was watching an Asian American perform on stage, to a mixed audience, and everybody's going wild and crazy. And so I think in a lot of ways, wow, that their generation has it better than probably my generation, where the representation that we had in entertainment and media was very limited when I was younger. So I think they're growing up in a good time regarding those things. Regarding their identity as pastors' kids, I think they all three. I have three children. I think they all deal with it a little differently. I think my first child, she really loved being at church, and she loved the potlucks and the food and the identity and socialization with others. So she really loved being a pastor's kid, and she was really proud of it. I think the other two, they're more shy about it. They don't tell everybody that they're pastors' kids or are basketed. And so I think everybody deals with it a different way. But I think I try not to have that be their identity, right? So I tell them your identity is that you're a believer in Jesus Christ. And that's your main identity. Whether I'm the pastor, whether that I'm just a lay person, whether I'm just coming off from the street visiting this church, nobody knows me. That's fine. I want your identity to not be tied to me. I want your identity to be yours. And so don't feel constrained by who I am, but explore your faith on your own. I want you to have your own relationship with Jesus Christ. It's not based on me. I'm not Christ. I'm just a pastor. I'm just shepherding people toward Christ. And so, I think a lot of pastors' kids, they feel a lot of pressure to live up to their parents' identity. And that's a lot of pressure. Right? There's enough pressure being a child. Can you imagine the pressure of living up to your parents' identity? I can't imagine, in some ways I tell this to my kids, I can't imagine being Michael Jordan's son and trying to play basketball. And that would be very difficult for me if I was Michael Jordan's son and I was trying to play basketball. And so I don't want my kids to experience something like that, especially with something as important and as vital as their faith in the Lord. And so I try to tell them, obviously by the nature of who they are as pastors' children, they can't help but face some of those pressures. But I try to alleviate that as much as possible. I try to tell them, yeah, it's not a big deal. I try to, I guess, divert some of the pressure away from them. Like, you don't have to do these things just because you're my child. If you want to do it because you want to honor the Lord, great. If you don't, that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. As a pastor's kid myself, I definitely understand the things that you're talking about. I just wanted to ask, what are some specific challenges you think a pastor's kid faces, just in case our listeners aren't exactly sure of what that really entails?
Well, okay, let me give an example. I guess that's probably I remember one time being at church when my kid was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and they were running around the sanctuary and like yelling and screaming, and a lot of the other kids were following my child, yelling and screaming and making a ruckus, like 4 or 5-year-olds do. This is normal for 4 or 5-year-olds. But I remember distinctly an older member of the church coming to me and saying, "Look at your child. What are they doing? Um, they're being a bad influence to the other young children. They should set the good influence by sitting in the first pew and sitting with their hands on their knees and being well behaved, because they should be the example for all the other children." And I was like, wow, so my child has to sit in the pews with their hands on their knees while other kids are having fun, laughing, and building connection with one another. Because those kids are not going to stop just because my kid's sitting on a pew. Okay, that's reality in my mind. And I was like, wow, I can't believe people would expect that of my child. And they would have expected me to grab my child and put them in the pew to be that example for the other kids. And I was like, wow, how am I going to reply to this statement? And I think my reply, I hope it was gracious. My reply at that moment was like, thank you for letting me know. I'll think about it. I think that's what I said. And then my kid kept running around. I thought about it, and I explained to you my thought process before. I was like, why am I going to constrain my child from being a child? This is what children do to fit your expectation of what my child should be. That has nothing to do with what God says about how a child should be. He says, come to me, little children, right? When the disciples were trying to keep the kids away, right? And so, yeah. Now, would my reputation take a hit because my kid was running around? Maybe to some people. But if I care for my child should be more important than my own reputation. This is where, when you have power and privilege, you should use it in service for others rather than for yourself. And so I tried to use my power at that moment to protect my child, at the expense of maybe people thinking badly of me or thinking badly of my family. And that's, that's just comes with the territory, right? If you're a public figure, that happens too. It's not just pastors. Public figures have to be well behaved in a public setting. Um, and yeah, and in some ways, I thought that's unfair. When I was a child, since my parents were not pastors, I was allowed to run around. I was allowed to be a child. Why can't my child be allowed to be a child? I mean, obviously there's limits here, right? If they're throwing stones at other kids or beating other kids up, of course I have to stop that, right? But if they're just running around having fun with other kids, is that something I should stop? Uh, that's a balance, right? Because I think this person didn't have bad intentions. They're like, the sanctuary is a place of worship. We shouldn't have kids running around there. I agree, but they singled out my child. And so that made it difficult. I think the way I resolved it is that I told all the children to go outside of the sanctuary and like, please honor this place of worship. This is not a playground. There's a playground at the back. You guys should go to the playground. I think I resolved it that way. I don't remember the details. This was quite a while ago. But I hope I did that in a gracious way. But sometimes as a parent, you get emotional in trying to protect your kid, and so. But I don't think I overreacted. It was a Sunday. I was on my best behavior, and yeah, and thank God we had a playground. I was like, I think maybe I said, "Oh, isn't it more fun to run around on the playground than over here?" Something like that.
I
And
think
hopefully they listen.
yeah, I think that's a really great example of how like identity can be passed down to your children and that people are
Mhm.
picking up on that and placing their expectations on your kids simply by what you do. Um,
Mhm.
and I was also wondering something that I've heard a lot from my friends who are pastors' kids, or even from the pastors themselves, is that it's such a hard balance to make sure that you are both being with your family, but also having your church as this family that you are feeling responsible
Yeah.
for pastoring. How have you navigated that? The balance between being at like home and being at home, but like also having this whole congregation that you feel like are your family that you are kind of looking
Sure.
after as well.
Yeah, I mean, the church is the family of God, and I am a pastor, which comes from the word shepherd, right? I am to shepherd and to care for God's flock. Um, I think the way I navigate that is I understand that even though I'm a shepherd, I'm an under shepherd, and the great shepherd of the sheep is good. And there's only one great shepherd of the sheep, and that's Jesus Christ. He's ultimately their shepherd, and God is ultimately their father, not me. And so that's kind of how I balance that. While I'm their shepherd, um, it they don't live and die because of me. They live and die because of Jesus Christ. And so that gives me a little freedom as the under shepherd to be able to say, hey, God, you're sovereign. Ultimately, you are their father, not me. And so while, yeah, I should be there when they're sick or when they're in the hospital, whether they're getting surgery, uh, I think I consider it an honor and privilege that I'm there at their most joyous moments, births and weddings, and their most difficult moments, um, hospital stays and funerals. That's an honor and privilege that I don't take lightly, that people let me into their lives in those moments. Um, but I think first and foremost in scripture, it tells me my responsibility as a pastor is to take care of my wife and my children. Uh, because in scripture, it says that if you don't take good care of your household, how can you take good care of the household of God? Uh, and so that's part of my call as well, to take good care of my wife and my children. Um, and so I want to find that balance between those two, because both can, unfortunately, both can be idols. We can idolize our work and we can idolize our family. And when we idolize either of those two, we neglect the other. And so the key here is to find the proper balance of both and hold them um, with an open palm, trusting in God. Because the same way I say that the congregation's ultimate father and ultimate shepherd is Christ, the same is for my children. Their ultimate father and ultimate shepherd is not me, it's Jesus Christ. And so, just how I need to hold my congregation with an open hand, I need to hold my children with an open hand. That I'm not the one who determines their future, it's God. I'm not the one who's their savior, it's God. And so, I just have to be faithful to the task given to me as their father. And yeah, in a lot of ways, it takes humility that we're not as important as we think we are sometimes. Yes, we're important, but let's not overstate our own importance. God is way more important than we are. And ultimately, he's in charge of the direction of the church and the direction of our children's lives.
Yeah, I think that's really great that it's kind of fighting against taking on your own savior complex in order to defer to the true savior.
Yeah.
Um, I was wondering, this is kind of switching gears a little bit. In terms of Texas specifically, how has it been navigating just Texas culture for you as a pastor and parent?
Mhm.
Um, but also, have you noticed a difference in parenting style between being in Texas versus, say, I know you were in the East Coast for a while?
Yeah. Well, I think what appreciate I'll tackle Texas culture first. I think when I first moved here, I was a little culture shocked because it was very different than growing up in the Northeast, and it's just a different culture. I never had people call me sir, and in so many times during a day. It's just I was like, wow, people were so respectful. People were so um, chivalrous. I think that's a good word to describe how Texas is. I think Texas still has chivalry, this uh, this code of how we should treat one another. We should hold the door open for one another. We should say hi to one another walking down the street. We should call each other sir and ma'am. And in a lot of parts of our country today, especially the coasts, a lot of that chivalry has gone by the wayside, right? We're more about transparency, more about. Uh, I grew up in the Northeast where it's more in your face. It's all about authenticity. It's all about being real. Um, and I was like, we don't have to be so real all the time, okay? There's something to be said about decorum and chivalry, and I think that's kind of what I experienced here in Texas. While I'm used to the grittiness and the realness of the Northeast, I've learned over the years as I've adjusted the culture of Texas to appreciate that. Wow, there is chivalry here that causes to bite our tongue and to hold back some of the thoughts that maybe shouldn't be aired out at certain moments, and allows us to treat each other with respect and dignity. Um, uh, I think one disadvantage of that, if you're so used to doing that, um, uh, is that you never get to the realness and authenticity that the Northeast has strength for. I never have to worry about someone in the Northeast to know what they think about me, because they will tell me what they think about me straight to my face. That's very different. Um, and there's moments where you need somebody to be raw and honest with you. And I think while I appreciate the chivalry, I think it's going to be heightened when there's discernment when to be able to let the chivalry go by the wayside and just be authentic and raw and honest with somebody about what you really feel about certain things. And like I said, there's a balance there, there's a dance there, but I've gotten to really appreciate, um, yeah, the chivalry that's here in Texas. The second part of your question, could you repeat that, Karis? Um, I think I only addressed the first part.
Yeah, it was the difference between East Coast and Texas parenting style.
Oh, the parenting styles. Um, I think the parenting styles differ because of schedules. I'll put it that. It differs because of schedules. Because a lot of times in the Northeast, I saw we had many couples who were working 2 jobs. So both the husband and the wife were working, was what I meant by that, and they would work long hours and they would commute. Uh, and so when you have long hours, when you have a lot of uh, high pressure jobs and you're commuting, even though you care for and love your children, there's not a lot of time for you to invest in them. And so uh, it's difficult to uh, in a busy environment to nurture a lot of face time with your kids, because in the Northeast there's a lot of financial pressure. The cost of living is higher. I think I've noticed in Texas, there's a lot more single income families where they're stay-at-home moms, because the cost of living is lower, and so they're able to maintain a household with a single income. And when you have that, you have a little more involvement in the kids' activities with their sports and with their extracurricular activities and with the PTA. And so I see there's maybe more helicopter parenting, you could call that. I don't know whether that's positive or negative, but there's more involvement uh, in in the children's lives. I would say more or less it's a positive. Uh, Unless it's overbearing, then it can become uh, a little more negative. Uh, and so I think that's a difference. I think it's I've noticed the time aspect. In Northeastern, parents love their children and they want to invest as much time as possible, but some of their work pressures preclude them from investing as much time as Texas parents have on their children. And so in some ways, I think some of the Texas athletes are really, really good because the parents invest a lot of time in their training in their particular sport, whether it's baseball or football or basketball or swimming, volleyball, what have you. I mean, I think some of the top athletes in our country come from Texas. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that's some really interesting insight. I never really thought about the differences in parenting in different parts of the country. But yeah, kind of switching gears here. How important do you think the church community was when you were raising your children?
oh, I thought they were vital and they were priceless. It was just really special to have a community of uh, people to navigate parenthood and the difficulties of parenthood when you're a first-time parent, and to experience that together with other young couples, and to pray for one another and to help each other, to cook for one another when uh, one of the mothers gives birth, to have advice from older women who have older children or who are empty nesters, and older men uh, who have older children and empty nesters, which is really valuable for me and my wife. I think to have a loving community around you that's pouring into you, um, and experiencing it together with people in the same life stage, as well as people in a life stage ahead of you who can share their experiences, their triumphs, and their struggles, as well as the young people who want to play with your children. And so um, I think as a young parent, I could really see the value of having a multi-generational church, where every generation is represented and every generation is pouring out into one another and blessing one another. And I think that's a beautiful picture of church, where each generation is speaking about God to one another, but also blessing one another. in practical ways. So yeah, we would. I don't think we would have been able to navigate having young children, several young children at the same time, without just the love and the care that was given to us by Christian community. That was very special and very precious.
I think that's really a beautiful picture of how the multi-generational church can like really support child raising. And my mom always says it takes a village. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, very much that's illustrating that. Kind of circling back to a common theme throughout this interview, how involved did you think you were, or are you, in your children's education?
How involved am I in my children's education? I'm pretty involved in a lot of ways. I Whenever they have, problems with their homework or trying to solve something, they would ask me, and I try to help. A lot of these subjects I haven't studied in a very long time, so it's a challenge. I think I remember when my son was going through Algebra 1 in middle school, and he was asking me for help, and I was like, I haven't studied this forever. Oh my. And so I actually had to Google how to do algebra again, certain things that I've forgotten. And I had to relearn algebra so I could teach him and I could tutor him. Uh, but it was fun. I thought it was a good experience. So it's funny because, we could both see our learning curve improve as I was helping him. Um, yeah. And I think, relationship with your children, um, is enhanced when you can help each other, and you can sit down, and because it's not just the work, you're like sitting down and you're talking about life and talking about school. It's an organic way of creating conversation rather than sit there and let's talk. And that's kind of awkward, right? It's like, what are we gonna talk about? But if you're helping them with the things that they're going through, and it takes a lot of effort and sacrifice. But like I said, if you value something, then you will invest in it. You invest in the things that you value. And, as an Asian American, we value education. And so we would invest our time and effort to help our kids with their education. So if, they need proofreading of their paper, then you would read the paper. You would proofread it. No, you misspelled this. You should punctuate it this way. Um, Little things like that, I think, communicate to the kids that you value education more than the forcing them part, right? Because you're actually sacrificing your time and your effort to help them get something and understand something and comprehend something, rather than just say, just do it because I said so, right? I think that doesn't communicate value of education as much as walking with them through it.
Very similarly, I guess, in terms of the idea of forcing kids through things, how involved are you in your children's spiritual journey? Because I know that like such a hard tension is that, okay, you don't want to force them to do anything and you want them to
Yeah,
have their own faith journey, but at the same time, you feel responsibility as their parent to like
yeah,
inculcate certain values. So how have you
sure. Yeah. So, like one of the practices we have as a family is we have a family devotional time. And so it's a short devotional that we go through together. Sometimes we sing songs, there's prayers, there's a reading of the word, and then there's a short reflection by an author that we go through. And then sometimes we talk through questions. I try not to make it too lengthy. It's not a worship service, it's just family time. Where we're able to share and open up with one another. But the context is spiritual and the context is God's word. We recently just went through a book written by a friend of mine, Esther Liu. She's an Asian American author. And she wrote this book, a devotional on shame. Like, how do we deal with shame? And I think as Asian Americans, that's a difficult topic to discuss and to go through. We all deal with shame. What does it mean for us to give our shame over to the Lord? And it was kudos to Esther Liu, who wrote this book. It was really beautifully well done, beautifully well written. And really, my kids and I had really good, deep conversations as we went through this devotional, and I was really thankful for that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's one way um, we're able to connect spiritually as a family. Um, we try to do it daily, but I try not to be dogmatic about that. So if they have a lot of homework, if they have a play, extracurricular activity, then we would put a pause that day on the family devotional. I try not to make it a chore. I try to make it something we all value when we do together. Um, the other thing is that I do is I give them rewards when they do their quiet times. And so, like one of my children, she does a journal for her quiet times, and she dates the journal. And then if she does a certain amount of dates, I think in a month, she's uh, done her journal for a month and done her quiet times, then I would give her a reward for uh, spending time with God. I mean, spending time with God is a reward in and of itself, but as a father, I want to incent that. I was like, that's great. I'll give you a reward too. So, so that's kind of my incentive to them. I give them a reward for the quiet times they spent with the Lord in reading His Word and spending time with Him. Because, I think as I've mentioned to you guys before, if you value something, then you would incent them to do it, right? Your incentives will match what you value. And so I want to incent them to spend more time with God. Hence, I reward that kind of behavior.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to go about it. Just incentivizing them. I think that's really smart. Kind of switching gears, what do you think is one of the more difficult things that you faced while raising your children?
One of the most difficult things that I've faced and raising, um, when they've experienced bullying or when they've experienced a racism. I think those things really hurt me as a father, as a parent. It's hard not to take those things personal um, when it happens to your children. Um, Praise the Lord, they're growing up, like I said, in a much better environment than I did back in the 80s. But it's not. It's a sinful and broken world that we live in. It's not perfect, right? And so yeah, they when they face bullying, when they face um, racism, then I try to walk with them through it, maybe cry with them through it, um, try to find reasonable solutions by talking to the principal or talking talking through what they're going through and listening. Uh, yeah, it's probably I think for any parent, you don't want your children to be hurt, right? And so I think those things um, are probably the hardest things that you walk with them through, and um, especially if you encountered that before yourself, and you're like, oh, I don't want my kids to encounter that, and so, um, but I think trials are meant to strengthen us and point us toward God, right? They're not meant to crush us, and so like how do we deal with it in a way that it doesn't crush us, but allows us to trust in God and to cling to Him, and so I just try to help them, how to pray for your bully. I think I was really encouraged by one of my kids in their prayers that at night when they were being bullied, they prayed for God to forgive their bully and for God to um, just help them not be a bully anymore. And I was really touched by that prayer. She didn't pray for revenge. She didn't pray for um, something bad would happen to this person, but she prayed for God to change their heart, and she prayed for forgiveness for this person. the good news is, I think maybe a year or two later, they're on relatively good terms and have reconciled to some degree. And so I was like, oh, that's healthy. That's you don't want to have toxic relationship with others. And so in some ways, God has really answered that prayer. And I'm glad that she was able to see God answer a prayer, a heartfelt prayer in that way.
Wow, yeah, that's so touching. That is, I can't imagine how much love and maturity it must take, for her to take that step. Yeah,
I was surprised. It was like she was in elementary school, so I was very surprised.
yeah, for sure. Kind of on the same path. What's something that you think your children have taught you?
Hmm. Taught me. Uh, I think they've taught me to relax. In some ways, that things will turn out even when I don't plan everything to its minute detail. Right. I mean, I think uh, we have this tendency to want to control things and to want to be able to say, if I do A, B, and C, it will result in D. Right. And so you're very diligent in doing A, B, and C to result in D. But rearing children is not like that. It's not a formula. And what works for one child doesn't work in another. So like, wait, no, I thought it was a formula. And so over the years, I realized it's not a formula. I can't control everything. And I can't force everything to be the way I want it to be. So I have to relax. And they've taught me to trust in God more and to trust them more. And so it's not easy. As a parent, I want to control, I want to protect, but that's a good lesson to learn, to trust in God and to trust in what God is doing in your children's lives and not overreacting, and and know that they have their own faith journey, that they have their own processes to get through, their own struggles, and they might not get to the same conclusion in the same way I got to them. But as long as they got to the same conclusion, that's great. It's just they went through a different road to get to that same conclusion. And yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, one of the most frustrating things that parents want for their kids is like we could take everything here and download it to our kids, right? All of our life experiences, all of the many decades of life and lessons learned. We want to take this and download it to our kids. That's not how it works. And even my OS might not fit their environment because they know their environment much better. They'll be saying these slang words from the 80s to people like, what are you talking about? You know? So, yeah, so I think that's, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of wrapping up, our concluding question is, what is your biggest hope for your children in the future?
My biggest hope, do you want the boilerplate answer? The boilerplate answer is that, you know, I want them to have a vibrant relationship with Jesus Christ. I want them to honor God and to love others around them. Yeah, uh, it's a very simple boilerplate answer, but I think it's my hope that they'll be able to navigate the world and be a productive member of society and to share God's shalom with those around them, and to love God and to love others. It's really a very simple hope. You know, I'm trying to think of a more sophisticated answer than my boilerplate answer, but it's just a simple hope for them that they would have healthy productive lives, that they would find joy with their community, and live out their calling, to live it to its best form, whatever God calls them to be and to do.
Yeah, it may be boilerplate, but I think it's still very beautiful.
Oh, okay, good. Thank
It
you.
still has its truth, you know?
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, is there anything else that you would want to say or share to add on to this topic in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that Karis and Karina, that you are doing this exploration of Asian American parenthood, as well as how faith impacts that. I think it's important for the next generation to understand like how parenting is so influential in how we view our own culture, how we view ourselves, and how we celebrate our culture. I know my parents have been very influential of me, and how to be proud of my heritage, and to be not ashamed of how God created me. And I think that's something that I want to pass on to my kids as well, right? So, parents are some of the most influential people in our lives, at least the first portion of our lives. But that influence doesn't have to wane if children have good relationships with their parents.